9.6 Control resources. Control resources is the process of ensuring the physical resources assigned and allocated to the project are available as required, as well as monitoring the planned versus actual utilisation of resources and taking corrective action as necessary. The key benefit of this process is ensuring that the assigned resources are available to the project at the right time and in the right place and are released when no longer needed. This process is performed throughout the project. The control resources process should be performed continuously in all project phases and throughout the project life cycle. The resources needed for the project should be assigned and released at the right time, right place and right amount for the project to continue without delays. The control resources process is concerned with physical resources such as equipment, materials, facilities and infrastructure. Team members are addressed in the managed team process. The control process techniques discussed here are those used most frequently in projects, and there are many others that could be useful in certain projects or in other applications. And that's from the PMBOK Guide, page 352. Updating resource allocation requires knowing what actual resources have been used to date and what is still needed. This is done mainly by reviewing the performance usage to date. I'm pretty sure this is a typo in the PMBOK Guide because performance usage to date doesn't actually make any sense. I think what they mean is this is done mainly by reviewing the work performance data for resource usage to date. Control resources is concerned with monitoring resource expenditures, modifying and dealing with resource shortage or surplus in a timely manner. If you have a resource surplus, it is costing you money just to have it sitting on the storeroom or out on site or wherever. It could be sold, it could be used in other projects or perhaps returned to the supplier. Another point to consider is that some resources can deteriorate. For example, iron can rust, chemicals can absorb water and so on. Ensure that resources are used and released according to the plan and project needs, informing appropriate stakeholders if any issues arise with relevant resources. Influence the factors that can create resource utilisation change and managing the actual changes as they occur. And I'm sure that you know that any changes need to made to the scheduler-based cost lines can be approved only through the Perform Integrated Change Control process. Control resources inputs. Number 1, project management plan. The components include the resource management plan. Resource management plan provides guidance on how physical resources should be used, controlled and eventually released. Input number 2, project documents. The project documents that can be considered for this input for this process are the issue log. The issue log is used to identify issues such as a lack of resources, delays of raw material supplies or low grades of raw material. And of course, you could record a surplus of resources. Lessons learned register. Lessons learned early in the project can be applied to later phases of the project to improve physical resource control. Physical resource assignments. The physical resource assignments describe the expected resource utilisation along with details such as type, amount, location and whether the resource is internal to the organisation or outsourced. Project schedule. This shows the resources that are needed, when they're needed and the location where they're needed. The resource breakdown structure provides a reference in case any resource needs to be replaced or reacquired during the course of the project. Resource requirements. These have the needed material, equipment, supplies and other resources. These are starting to sound a bit similar, and I'm sure that several of these documents are merged on a number of projects, but as always they won't be merged on the examination. So we've seen the resource requirements tells us what resources are needed. The resource breakdown structure tells us how they're to be made up if they're formed from other components. The physical resource assignments tells us how and where they will be used and when the project team will use them or a third party will use them, and a resource management plan tells us how they will be used, controlled and eventually released. The risk register. This identifies individual risks that can impact equipment, materials or supplies. Input number 3, work performance data. This contains data on project status such as the number and type of resources that have been used. Input number 4, agreements. Agreements are legal agreements and such as contracts and form the basis of all resources external to the organisation and should define procedures when new unplanned resources are needed or when issues arise with the current resources. Number 5, organisational process assets would include policies regarding resource control and assignment, escalation procedure for handling issues within the performing organisation, and lessons learned repository for previous similar projects. Control resources, tools and techniques. Number 1, data analysis. The technique that could be used in this process would include alternatives analysis, which can be used to analyse and select the best solution from correcting variances in resource utilisation. Remember, we are in the control resources process, and so the alternatives are to do with utilising resources, meaning the rate of use against the plan, and taking action if the two are not in alignment. Alternatives such as paying additional or overtime or additional team resources can be weighed against a late delivery or phased deliveries, for example. This sounds a bit confusing because it sounds like we're controlling human resources, but what we're considering is bringing on more staff or getting them to work overtime if the resources are not being consumed quickly enough. Cost-benefit analysis. This helps to determine the best corrective action in terms of cost in case of project deviations. As I mentioned before, a cost-benefit of 2 to 3 means that for each $2 you spend, you get a benefit equivalent of $3. Performance reviews. Performance reviews measure, compare and analyse planned resource utilisation to actual resource utilisation. And again, this is a project performance, not team performance. Cost and schedule work performance information can also be analysed to help pinpoint issues that influence resource utilisation. Trend analysis. As a project continues, the project team may use trend analysis based on current project performance to determine the resources needed in upcoming stages of the project. Trend analysis examines project performance over time and can be used to determine whether performance is improving or deteriorating. Tool and technique number 2, problem solving. Problem solving may use a set of tools that helps the project manager to solve problems that arise during the control resource process. The problem can come from inside the organisation, such as machines or infrastructure used by another department in the organisation and not released in time. Materials have been damaged because of unsuitable storage conditions, etc., or from outside the organisation. Major suppliers gone bankrupt or bad weather has damaged resources. The project manager should use methodical steps to deal with problem solving. These can include identify the problem, define the problem. This means break it into smaller, manageable problems if possible. Investigate. This means collecting data. And analyse. Find the root cause of the problem. And remember, for the exam, when you see root cause, you should always think of Ishikawa, fishbone, cause and effect, or YY diagram. Solve. Choose the suitable solution from a variety of available ones and check the solution, which means to determine if the problem has actually been fixed. Tools and techniques number 3, interpersonal and team skills. Sometimes known as soft skills or personal competencies, which are related to your personality. The interpersonal and team skills used for this process would include negotiation. The project manager may need to negotiate for additional physical resources, changes in physical resources, or costs associated with the resources. Influencing. This can help the project manager solve problems and obtain the resources needed in a timely manner. Tools and techniques number 4, project management information systems. Such systems can include resource management or scheduling software and can be used to monitor the resource utilisation, which helps ensure that the right resources are working on the right activities at the right time and places. Control resources outputs. Number 1, performance information. Work performance information includes details on how the project work is progressing by comparing resource requirements and resource allocation to resource utilisation across project activities. This comparison can show gaps in resource availability that need to be addressed. And as mentioned before, we might consider extra staff on overtime if things are going too slowly. Output number 2, change requests. When change requests occur as a result of carrying out the control resources process, or when recommended corrective or preventative actions impact any of the components of the project management plan or the project documents, guess what has to happen? That's right, the project manager needs to submit a change request for review and action through the Perform Integrated Change Control process. Output number 3, project management plan updates. Any change to the project management plan goes through the organisation's change control process via a change request. Components that may require a change request for the project management plan include resource management plan. This is updated to reflect actual experiences in managing project resources. If things are not happening as planned, then you need to check if the plan itself needs changing. Schedule baseline. Changes to the project schedule may be required to reflect the way project resources are being managed, and similarly for the cost baseline. Output number 4, project document updates. What we'll be updating here is the assumption log, which may be updated with new assumptions regarding equipment, materials, supplies and other physical logs. The issue log for new issues that are raised as a result of this process. Lessons learned register. The lessons learned register can be updated with techniques that were effective in managing resource logistics, scrap, utilisation variances and corrective actions that were used to respond to resource variances. In the exam, the word scrap means work that was spoiled and can't be economically repaired, rather than leftover materials or offcuts or stuff sitting there that you haven't been able to use. Physical resource assignments. These are dynamic and subject to change due to the availability, the project, organisation environment and other known factors. Resource breakdown structure, again, may be required to reflect the way project resources have been used. The risk register, updated with any new risks associated with resource availability, utilisation or other physical resource risks. And that brings us to the end of control resources process and also the end of the project resource management module. The next module is project communication management. Please read the corresponding chapter in the PMBOK guide before watching the video and you will get much more out of it.